The Department of Homeland Security might be asked to investigate whether terrorists use virtual currencies like Bitcoin. A corresponding bill was introduced by U.S. Democrat Congresswoman Kathleen Rice last week. If passed, legislation would task the department to conduct a joint probe with federal agencies on the matter. The assessment will also aim to determine whether terrorists receive funding with virtual currencies. The latter have recently gained momentum amongst criminals as transactions in them are fast and have a greater degree of anonymity. Yet, so far, there's been no proof that terrorists use virtual currency in any meaningful way. According to previous reports, the so-called Islamic State, also known as Daesh, also known as ISIL, also known as ISIS, rakes in millions of dollars per day through more traditional avenues like oil.
Joining us live to further discuss this is Dr. Curran, a professor of cybersecurity at Ulster University. A very warm welcome to you.
Good afternoon, Graham.
First of all, this is not the first time Bitcoin has been accused of facilitating terrorism. Is there any truth to this in your view?
Yeah, in the 2015, the UK government investigated this, and they released a report that detailed that Bitcoin is not used for terrorism or as a criminal risk. They just said that digital currencies are currently not a method by which terrorists seem to raise or move money. And again, that was followed up there just a few months ago by Royal United Services Institute report, again, which found that terrorists were not using it, that there were a few instances where they had registered Bitcoins, but very little money went into it. And as you stated before, generally ISIS and others just favor the old greenback, the US dollar, and make the money from old school oil smuggling, taxes on subjugated populations and other things. And they find that Bitcoin's price volatility against other currencies makes the system very risky for a terrorist group. They basically don't like a payment method which could lose half its value in a day. So to date, we cannot say that large terrorist cells are using Bitcoin to a large degree.
They're quite conservative then in their financial actions.
Yeah, again, I suppose it's not the simplest thing either, and again, the money's got to come out of there somewhere. So again, they're using traditional means of getting their money.
Could you tell our listeners more about what makes cryptocurrencies so attractive to criminals or terrorists?
Okay, so Bitcoin is the most famous, the most popular cryptocurrency. So again, these are virtual. Bitcoins are earned by machines which compute large numbers, and then every 10 minutes, one machine becomes a winner, and a new Bitcoin is formed, and then that gets broadcast to all the other nodes which are running the Bitcoin software, and that enters what we call a blockchain, a distributed list of transactions. So again, there's no physical Bitcoins, but they do belong to people, and they store them in their virtual wallets, and again, it's just been increasing in value. It's over the $2,000 mark now. It's increased in a short space of time. And of course, it's got this pseudo-anonymity. In other words, that every Bitcoin you own really is detailed by a long gobbledygook number. And it doesn't tail back to your identifier. It doesn't identify you in any way. So therefore, it seems on the face of it as being a great way of being able to receive payments and not also reveal your true world identity. So therefore, it's favored by criminals, and of course, we're seeing the nightmarish ransomware attack last week called WannaCry, where again, the only way that these ransomware attacks can be facilitated is through using a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, which again, that the criminals behind it hope that they remain anonymous.
You mentioned WannaCry, but for what other purposes and what scale could terrorists use Bitcoin? Okay,
there's also what we call denial of service attacks. That's where you send too many packets to a website and it cannot cope, so therefore it crashes and it cannot service legitimate customers. So again, in the past, denial of service attacks were only done infrequently by hackers testing out what they could do, and it was really only used for maybe up in arms against a cause or against a particular site for whatever reason, but there was no money to be made until the arrival of Bitcoin. Now what you're seeing is hackers are going to websites, and we don't know about most of these crimes, and they say, we will bring your website down unless you pay us a Bitcoin ransom. And the only way for a lot of these companies to remain live on the internet is to pay this ransom in the background. So therefore, the second most popular use for Bitcoin is for as in security, as in cyber attacks, is in denial of service attacks and getting the ransoms paid.
How likely are cryptocurrencies to be used by terrorists on a larger scale as they lose more and more traditional ways of getting revenues?
It's an obvious next step for them to do it. Again, for like a lot of people, the majority of people using Bitcoin at the moment are either speculators or geeks, because the barriers to entry are still a little high for the average person. You've got to go to websites, you've got to link your existing fiat currency, you've got to do credit checks, then you've got to be able to store the information, store the Bitcoin securely, either in a cloud service or on your computer, and you've got to treat them like gold, because if you lose what we call the private key, you can call that a password if you want. If someone finds that, then they can steal all your Bitcoins, and it's the simplest way to lose all your money that you have in Bitcoins. So at the moment, it is still too complicated for your average granny to use. So therefore, but like everything else in technology, things get easier, and there is just momentum behind it because it can be used for so many things. So we're going to see again the terrorists using it. We're going to see, of course, the increase in criminals using it, but we will also see the public using it as well. So again, at the moment, it is the number one by a long shot by any other cryptocurrency. Maybe another one might come along, but at the moment, Bitcoin remains a dominant cryptocurrency in use, and you can only see its use increasing because now people are hearing about it. We're seeing the symbol accepted on websites. It's just becoming more and more pervasive in the online world.
Is there any way Bitcoin could be insulated against criminal use, or is it like any other currency in its universal application?
Absolutely. It can be used for good or bad. It can be used, again, the number one use is we're hoping that it'll become a universal currency, because the thing about Bitcoin is there is no central authorities. No banks control it. No financial organizations control it. The people who own Bitcoin control it. And therefore, they can set the transaction fees for you to send money. So potentially Bitcoin can bypass a lot of the fees that we're paying at the moment to use credit cards and other financial services. So that's why it is loved by so many. But of course, we cannot stop criminals using it for these effects. And it is very difficult to see how to do anything about that, because the anonymity at the moment of it is not perfect, because it can be traced if law enforcement has enough power behind it and pool the resources, they can trace the larger criminals, the larger attacks which are done. But for the majority of ordinary people using it, they wouldn't have the resources to trace it. And the main way they trace it is when people try to take their money out of Bitcoin back into the real world. And to do that, they have to go through Bitcoin exchanges, which are regulated. So therefore, there is a way for them to be captured. Now, there's also ways for criminals to mix their coins up, as we say online, that they can send them using these mixer services, which scramble the coins and should allow them to remain anonymous then. But again, we don't know how secure some of those mixers are, and there is a risk that still the larger authorities, the larger law enforcement agencies will find people who are doing the larger acts online.
And lastly, what is the future for Bitcoin? Growing legitimacy, greater regulation and restriction?
It will grow. Whether it is Bitcoin or it's Bitcoin 2 or the next cryptocurrency, which also builds on this fabulous infrastructure, the blockchain, replicates most of the wonderful things that it has done. But there is no doubt that cryptocurrencies are going to be the currency of the internet, because they bypass the banks. They allow you to pay for microservices. I mean, you can pay for 1/1,000,000th of a packet of something. You can really break Bitcoin down into fantastic fractions. The problem is, of course, it will be regulated. They will come in because governments of the world will see that this is going to rise, that it's a threat to the current financial institutions. They will also see the risks inherent with this. currency which can fall, within hours. But we will see that more regulations will come in, but we will just see it being accepted further and further, and it's very hard for any government to put a stop to it because of the legitimate uses. And of course, because the internet has no borders, people will just go outside their country's financial systems, their country's regulations, and they will find Bitcoin. And of course, if your files are around somewhere, you're going to scramble to get the Bitcoins. You're going to ignore your local government's regulations as well. So we're just going to see more cryptocurrency, and it becoming easier to use, and it becoming literally the currency of the internet.
Well, unfortunately, we have to end it there, but it's been a pleasure to speak to you. That was Dr. Curran, Professor of Cybersecurity at Ulster University.